Hello, I'm Evan Matthews, editor of the Goat News. Today I'll be speaking with incumbent MLA Shirley Bond and Liberal candidate for the Prince George Valemount riding. Most recently, Shirley served as the Minister of Jobs, Tourism and Skills Training and the Minister responsible for Labour, but she was first elected in 2001. Shirley will be seeking her 5th consecutive term, as will the Liberal Party. So thanks for speaking with us today, Shirley.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So let's jump right into it. It's no secret that the Prince George Valemount riding is geographically vast. In terms of population, we're talking about 70,000 in Prince George versus potentially about 5,000 in the Robson Valley. How exactly do you plan to equally represent the urban and rural concerns, and having been in politics for a while now, do so with a fresh lens?
Well, first of all, I am incredibly proud of the riding that I represent, and I think it is an incredibly diverse riding, both geographically but also in terms of the needs of the residents who live here. There's no doubt it's challenging to be an MLA in a riding that has a significant urban centre but then has incredibly important regional cities and communities and interests. I think it's a matter of a pretty hectic work schedule, making sure that you remember always who sent you to Victoria, the people who had confidence to mark an X beside your name on the ballot. I think it's also about remembering that what's important for Valemount isn't necessarily the same concerns that McBride would have. And while I think there's things we can do together and tackle together, I learned very early in my first term as an MLA that Valemount might have some different thoughts than McBride, and that may not apply to Dome Creek and Dunster and Crescent Spur. So I think it's about a significant commitment to showing up, to spending time in the Robson Valley region. I think I've demonstrated to people that live here, even if they don't agree with some of the things we've done, that I care about the people who live here, I care about their views, and most importantly, I make the effort to show up. My office works very hard to connect regularly with constituents and work through their issues. So, I'm committed to making sure the voices of rural British Columbians, and particularly the Robson Valley region, continue to be heard in Victoria.
Okay. One concern that we have heard consistently from the various communities in this region is in regards to rural education. And many of the parents have expressed concern with the funding formula. Now, with underfunding consistently affecting these schools and schools having to do more with less, how do you plan to address that issue?
Well, I think it's a legitimate concern, and I certainly have heard from parents and educators here in the Robson Valley about the importance of paying attention to the issue as related to rural education. I've also come to learn in my time, previously I was elected as a school trustee and I was the liaison representative for the Robson Valley region at that time, that schools are far more than just buildings, and it's more about being the heart of a community. And I am concerned there continues to be declining enrollment here, and we're going to have to work together to be very creative about how we ensure that there are opportunities that are consistent with what other students in British Columbia have in terms of choice and opportunity. So we've got our work cut out for us, and I've worked to have a very good relationship with the School District 57 Board of Trustees. They're well aware of how I feel about the importance of keeping rural schools open, and in fact our government has committed to a review of the funding formula. We know that's been part of the problem, and as we do our consultation on rural education, that's been one of the themes that's emerged. There was a lot of participants from this region in that consultation, and they made it clear they want the funding issue addressed. They want to make sure that there's expanded choice for students who live in these communities, and most importantly, they want to have a really thoughtful discussion about keeping schools open. I think it's also important that we have a rural enhancement fund, and we did work to save small rural schools in other parts of the province where there were going to be closures, and those decisions had been made, and we stepped in and said we're not prepared to see that happen. So I'm going to continue to be an advocate for rural education. I have come to be quite a vocal spokesperson in Victoria about issues that are related to communities that we live in. So I think it's a current issue, I think it's relevant, and I think we're going to have to work hard to make sure that we retain the kinds of opportunities here in the Robson Valley despite declining enrollment.
Okay. Now, obviously the Robson Valley's communities are small, they're diverse, and they tend to fluctuate in number. But the region also has a high number of people who identify with Aboriginal ancestry and things of that nature. So in a very general sense, rural communities have comparatively poorer health outcomes and socioeconomic status compared to urban counterparts. So how do you intend to ensure that access to the primary healthcare services, ensure access to specialized prenatal and medical specialized services are available as people need them, and in the same breath supporting senior citizens as they age in rural communities?
Well, first of all, there's no doubt about it. You know, northern health outcomes are skewed, and we have some of the, we have some challenges with outcomes here in northern BC, and those outcomes demand that we pay attention to ensuring that we have services available. And I think people who live in rural British Columbia recognize that you're not likely to have brain surgery, you know, in smaller communities. There is a role for specialized services being dealt with at a provincial level. But should we expect the ability to have a basic level of quality care in rural communities? Of course we should. And I've been very impressed, for example, with the doctors that we've managed to recruit and retain here in Valemount, and their innovation and the way that they use, for example, telehealth. I worked with them to look at the issue of connectivity so that when they're not able to be physically in McBride, that they can still provide support throughout the Robson Valley. So, I think we've made some headway. There's no doubt that we need to continue to look at investments. Some of the things that we're looking at in terms of seniors, for example, we know that if a senior is relatively healthy, they'd rather be in their home than anywhere else. So we're going to, for example, double the opportunity in terms of funding for renovating your house to make it easier for you to stay at home if you need some additional work there. So, we're going to double the funding available for people who want to do that. We're going to add some additional funding for respite care. Caring for a senior citizen, someone that you love, someone that you care about, can be a very difficult circumstance. So we're going to add some additional funding there. We're going to add $500 million to look at how people are cared for in residential care, making sure there's a minimum level of service. So we've spent a long time talking to people here in the Robson Valley. They want to make sure there's seniors housing available, and I think we've made some progress there. I think we recognize there's more work to be done. We do have investments that are laid out in our platform. The good news is that they're costed and we can afford to pay for them.
Awesome. So obviously the topic of economic development comes up quite a bit, especially in these small communities with some of how the industry has changed. So I've kind of broken this topic down into a couple subcategories, but let's start with part of your portfolio, which is tourism. The announcement of VGD, it should help solidify and propel that change from a resource-based economy to a tourism-based economy. So, in speaking with some locals, there are still, even at this point, some doubters. What's the likelihood of the potential of this project falling through at this point? My research kind of shows that it might be unprecedented, but I'm interested to hear what you might have to say on that.
Well, I think that one of the things that has been a focus of my work, both as a minister and as an MLA, is diversifying the economy. You don't have to look very far to the east to look at what happens when a province has a reliance on a single commodity. And boy, the impacts, and none of us celebrate the fact that Alberta's having some pretty tough times. So we as a government decided that we needed to concentrate on diversifying the economy. And it doesn't matter if you're a metropolitan city or a small rural community, we want to see you have a diverse economy. So for me, the tourism opportunities here are significant. And it became a pretty personal file for me when it comes to Valemount Glacier development. And I know there were some critics. They felt that we didn't move quickly enough. They felt that we needed to work harder. And I guess from my perspective, you've got to balance the speed with which you do things with the rigor. And I wanted to be sure that when we were doing the provincial work necessary to get to the place where we could say yes to Valemount Glacier development, that there had been a rigorous process so that we can say to people who are questioning whether or not resort development is appropriate, yeah, we did our homework. We made sure that it was appropriate. The other part of that was absolutely essential for me was the involvement of the Simpcw First Nation. We want to see partnerships. We want to enable First Nations people in British Columbia to benefit from the place that is their home. So I think what I'm optimistic about is the developers have built a very credible case for this project to move forward. My job was to get the provincial ball over the line. And I'm thankful that, we did that. We've now been able to say to the development team and to the investors, we've done our part. Now it's up to you to make sure you deliver this for the people of this region. So I'm optimistic. And I think there's another aspect that we have to think about with that. People are going to decide on May the 9th which government is going to be in power on May the 10th. I think that if you see a significant shift where you inherit a government that's not prepared to be fiscally disciplined, that isn't as worried about creating a climate where investors feel confident, I think you're gonna see some concerns in the investment world. Today, we have the leading economy in the country. We have some of the top tourism numbers in Canada. I think that will give investors some sense of confidence if they're going to move forward with the Valemount Glacier project. I'm not sure that they will feel the same way, depending upon the government that's elected on May the 9th.
Okay. And to build on the VGD topic, it's kind of a two-facet question, but how can small businesses in Valemount and McBride potentially capitalize on the residual success of this resort?
What's been fantastic about that is I feel a sense of renewed optimism. It has been heartbreaking for me as someone who's represented this valley for many years to see boarded up windows in the downtown and people choosing and just not being able to make a go of it. But as I've been outdoor knocking, and I've done a lot of it here in McBride and in all of my communities, because I think it's important to show up and talk to people about their issues. I went to a bed and breakfast, for example, where that bed and breakfast is actually for sale. But the owner said to me, I think that with the potential of Valemount Glacier, I think we might have the hope that someone might take this bed and breakfast, make it as successful as it can possibly be, because the season would be extended. It wouldn't necessarily be a single season operation anymore. So I think there's a sense of optimism. Plus, I've always believed that small business is critical in small communities. We need to be thinking about growing local, buying local, supporting local businesses, and we've got some fantastic ones here. I make no bones about it. I love the Swiss Bakery. I talk about it all the time. I love the Caribou Grill. When you think about where's one of the best places that you can come and visit and enjoy small businesses, I think Valemount has a lot to offer. So I am hopeful that with the optimism that the approvals for Valemount Glacier have brought to the community, that people will have a bit more fiscal certainty. And then we just have to look at three ranges. I mean, when you look at our community and some of the opportunities that exist, I think we can benefit if we can see the Valemount Glacier move ahead.
Okay. Still on economic development, but moving into forestry. Mm-hmm. There's obviously been some concerns. Going back to the 90s, the number of mills in the province has continued to decline. Then there was the impact of the mountain pine beetle. And now we have the U.S. President Donald Trump talking about 20% tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber exports. So my question to you is, with such a high number of job losses and challenges facing the industry, maybe in what was once the most prevalent industry in the province, what is your plan to revitalize the industry, or is revitalizing the industry the answer?
Well, I can tell you this, certainly as an MLA who lives in a forest-dependent, resource-dependent part of the province, I'm certainly not going to give up in the forest industry. And I do think it is a time for innovation. It's a time for looking even more consistently and more aggressively at value added. I think that's where we have in the Robson Valley region an opportunity to see some of that niche work. You look at people who create furniture and musical instruments and those kinds of things. It's going to take a lot of hard work. I think that right now what we need to say to British Columbia's forest-dependent communities is, we're going to stand up for you. And I can't think of a more critical time where we need to have a government that has experience, that's prepared to stand up to the U.S. and say, we're not going to let you destroy the softwood lumber industry in British Columbia. So we've gone about that in a number of ways as we've prepared for this. We've looked at expanded markets. For example, our market share in China for BC wood products has increased by 2,000%. And the thinking behind that is that if you can expand and increase the number of partners you have, you're going to be far less reliant on the United States. And we're going to continue that emphasis. We're going to make sure we're working with Japan and Korea, and we've also made a significant effort to work with India. So from a provincial perspective, we're going to stand up for forest-dependent communities where we've looked at programs like the Rural Dividend Fund, which are specifically targeted to communities that are in transition and struggling. And in fact, both Valemount and McBride have been successful in rural dividend funding, and we're going to see that program continue. I really want to compliment the work being done by the Valemount Community Forest. I know there were tough discussions about appurtency, and I think I've been asked about that every single election since I was first elected in 2001. I'm under no illusions. That had an impact on mills and communities in the Robson Valley region. And our response to that was returning tenure, giving local communities decision-making authority around their fiber. And so when you see a successful community forest model like the one in Valemount, I think that's how we can derive some additional local benefit. So the forest issue is complicated. I can tell you, though, as the Jobs Minister, looking back at what's happened since the Jobs Plan in 2011, we've actually added back 9,000 more forestry jobs. So I don't see forestry as a sunset industry at all. I think we need to be innovative. I think we have to focus on value added. I think we need to deal with the issue of access to fiber. That's really, I think, the critical issue. It's been something we've had a lot of discussion about in the Robson Valley, and I want to make sure that we're going to come together, work on that issue, make sure that we can find access for those mill owners, for those loggers, for those people who are dependent on that as their family income.
Kinder Morgan.
Yes.
The BC Liberal Party supports it. Mm-hmm. You said you support it. It's provincially and federally approved, but it's still a contentious issue, mostly in the Lower Mainland, more so, maybe less so than it is up in here in the north, mm-hmm. Where it can potentially provide economic opportunity. But what is the likelihood with public protest or a change in government even of preventing this project from going ahead?
Mm-hmm. Well, personally, I think that there does need to be a healthy debate in our province about resource development, and I think people should ask those tough questions of governments. So let's look at our position on Kinder Morgan and where we have been. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is the fact that we've been consistent in our views about how you get to yes for resource development projects in the province. I don't think it's a hit and miss kind of process. And I have to admit, the opposition's been pretty much all over the map when it comes to today we support it, tomorrow we're not sure. We've been clear and we've been consistent. We laid out 5 key principles that we said before Kinder Morgan that we would approve the Kinder Morgan project from a provincial perspective had to be met. They were all about benefits for First Nations, benefits for British Columbians, making sure we have adequate spill response, all of those kinds of things. So when the Prime Minister decided that Kinder Morgan was a project that was in the national interest, British Columbia still said we have 5 conditions that have to be met, and we ensured that those conditions were met before we said that the province would agree to that project. So I think that it is important to consider the economy and the environment. I'm not a believer that it's about the economy or the environment. It's about both. You need to do projects in a responsible, environmentally sustainable way. I think that's possible with Kinder Morgan, and we in this region, we have experience with that. And I think the toughest thing for people running for office is to sort out where they stand when a party takes a position and when you're a locally elected MLA. I think there are different views about Kinder Morgan here in this region. I'm not suggesting everyone's a fan, but I do know that I think the people of Valemount recognize the benefit that Kinder Morgan brought to this community. I think we have to look beyond one-time projects to make sure we have a sustainable economic strategy, but I do think that when we can see more business in our laundromats and in our bakeries and in our hotels and in our RV parks, I don't think that we should simply say because Burnaby doesn't like it that we're not going to look at that project. So you know, I think we've taken a responsible approach to resource development in British Columbia. We have core principles that need to be met, conditions before we're going to say yes. But I can tell you this, I believe that well-paying family-supporting jobs are what we need to be focused on in this election discussion, in this campaign. And I think we've laid out a pretty clear path to getting to yes here, not just with Kinder Morgan, but with other important resource projects.
So let's assume that the project does go ahead, and you did just touch on some of the economic opportunity in terms of even an influx of people with the Kinder Morgan employees and spending their money here and things like that. But what other economic opportunity will locals see with this type of thing coming in here?
Well, I think the most immediate thing is the spin-off economic benefit of having, you know, the actual construction taking place. It means jobs. It means spin-off into local businesses and into the local community. And as I said, I don't think that is the long-term answer for economic sustainability in the Robson Valley. I see the need for us to continue to diversify, looking at things like tourism. One of the things I'm really excited about, and I think people are surprised when I bring this up, because I admit I'm not a mountain biker, but you know, when you look at the initiatives that organizations like Varda and others have taken on in terms of developing more of an all-season approach to tourism, you know, the mountain biking connections that we could put together with a circuit basically in this region of the province, if you connect that to the fact we're attached to, you know, almost Highway 5, but Highway 16, we're very close to the ancient forest, you know, mountain biking, sledding, all of those kinds of things. So I don't see, you know, Kinder Morgan as the long-term answer. I see it as short-term economic benefit that will infuse the community with some additional revenue and maintain some of those jobs. But I think together we need to be looking at what else can we see happen here in the Robson Valley. I'm also a supporter of clean energy. I've been an outspoken fan of run-of-the-river projects. That hasn't always been the case with the opposition, but certainly I know that you know, looking at clean power projects like Run of the River create jobs in communities like this, McBride and throughout the valley. And I'm also very interested in continuing the discussion about geothermal. I know how hard people are working here to talk about that potential. And in fact, you know, mayors have come with me to Victoria to talk to the energy minister about the fact that it's a small footprint, clean energy. So I don't, as I said, you know, not to be repetitive, but I think that Kinder Morgan has a role to play in a short-term economic investment here in the Robson Valley, should it move forward. But in the end of the day, we have a lot more work to do, to look at other options, to look at what kind of sustainable economic development plan we can put in place. And I want to thank Mayor and Council, this one, previous ones, for their focus on economic development. It's noticeable, and I think that's incredibly important as we move forward.
I was going to ask you about geothermal next. You kind of already touched on it, so don't have to get too far into it. But I guess just to touch on it, obviously Borealis does have a presence here. We have the Valemount Geothermal Society. We know from Geoscience BC that with the Rocky Mountain Trench, Valemount specifically is a geothermal hotspot. So you've said you think it's a valid alternative potentially. What type of commitments can we expect in the next 4 years in terms of geothermal energy? Well,
what I can commit to is continuing to be an advocate, working our way through the process that's needed. And I did talk to Geoscience BC, and as you know, they did a study. They looked at the potential here in this part of British Columbia, and we've taken that message to then Energy Minister Bill Bennett, who was generally supportive, and so I think what I like about the fact that we have people talking about other options is that, once again, it's about diversification of the economy, and we need to bring people along with us here in the Robson Valley as we talk about those possibilities. One of the things I really like about the Valemount Glacier development process, there have been very few projects that I've seen that have worked as hard as the proponents and others here in the valley did to bring people along, to say, here's what the benefits could be, here's why it's important. I think geothermal is in that same position. You know, we need people to understand how it can bring benefit, how it has a fairly minimal impact on the environment and a small footprint, and it could create some jobs. So we need to continue to talk about diversification. I think geothermal has a role to play. It's too early to say, you know, what specifically the next steps will be, because the biggest issue is finding investors who are willing to bring that funding that's necessary to move forward in the next steps.
Well, similarly to VGD, it's the kind of thing where you do have to do it the right way, so it does take time. But let's play out a hypothetical situation here. Say the BC Liberal government does not win the election and there is a different party that comes into power, but as the incumbent, you win your seat. How is that going to change your approach to being the MLA of this riding?
I think that's going to be a very significant challenge. I think that one of the things that I think we're all seeing in this election campaign is that the perceived battleground for deciding the next government in British Columbia is not exactly in the Cariboo, central interior, or northern part of the province, and I'm discouraged by that. You know, I love where we live, and I also am I am very aware of where the significant revenue is generated in this province, and believe me, it's in this part of BC. So I think that it becomes even more critical if there is a change in government, and obviously I'm hoping British Columbians want to continue the momentum. You know, we've got a province that today is the envy of the country when it comes to balanced budgets, when it comes to the lowest unemployment rate, most jobs created, all of those financial metrics have British Columbia leading the country. That, you know, that's not necessarily a predictor of the outcome on May the 9th. I hope it is. But what I can tell the people of this region is that if you have an MLA that is representing this part of the valley, we're going to have to be very outspoken, strong champions to make sure that our voices are heard. So I guess what I hope that the people of Valemount, McBride, and the Robson Valley region will do when they choose their MLA is look at who's been fighting on their behalf. I think that if there were to be a change of government, it's going to be even more critical that you have a champion, someone who knows this region intimately, who can take those concerns. But again, I'm optimistic that the people of British Columbia, when they go to mark their ballot on May the 9th, will ask themselves, you know, if British Columbia is leading the country today, are we prepared to put that at risk? And I hope that when they mark their X, they'll recognize we're not perfect. No government is. But do you want to take the risk that we're going to go back to being a province that is last in economic development? You know what compelled me to run in the first place was the fact that British Columbia was deemed a have-not province. This incredible province, so rich with resources, both with people and commodities, all of those things, that we had to get transfer payments from other provinces. That's what compelled me to run in 2001, and that's what compels me to run today. You know, we've gone from worst to first. I'm simply not prepared to put that at risk. And I think that voters have to ask tough questions of parties that are making gigantic promises and they're not costed. There's only 3 ways that you can pay for those things. 1, you can redirect resources from other projects, in other words, and other programs. What are you going to cancel to pay for it? 2, you can generate new revenue. That's going to be pretty hard when you're continually saying no to an economic development project. So you're not likely going to grow revenue. That leaves one other source, and that is taxpayers and increased taxes. And we even saw in the recent debate, you know, the leader of the opposition was asked specifically whether he would rule out tax increases for British Columbians. He didn't answer the question. And I think that speaks volumes about what taxpayers are going to face if our government is not re-elected.
We've covered a lot of different topics in this conversation that affect this region. Of course, we can't cover them all, so just quickly in close, what would you like to leave our viewers with?
Well, I want to begin with an incredibly heartfelt thank you. You know, it is an unbelievable honor to be elected. It's It's a real feeling of vulnerability when you put your name on a ballot. I still remember the first time that I saw my name on a ballot. It's a very emotional thing to see your name and ask people to support you. So I think I want to just end by saying I have been honored to be the representative for this part of British Columbia. I absolutely love where we live. I think you need a tireless worker, a champion and an advocate. And I hope that together we can continue to build on the momentum that we feel that is beginning, the optimism that we're starting to feel around things like Valemount Glacier, the mountain biking, the brewery, all of the things that are sort of coalescing. So I hope we're going to build on that momentum. I hope we're going to continue to tell the story of the Robson Valley region, making sure that we hear our voices in Victoria instead of Victoria directing what should happen here in the Robson Valley. So I just want to say thank you. It's been an incredible honor, and I truly hope that I'll be given that opportunity to go back to Victoria on behalf of this region after May the 9th.
Well, we really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Welcome. And for Shirley Bond, for VCTV, and for the Rocky Mountain Goat News, I'm Evan Matthews.